Hello, in this video I will be telling you about how freshmen can improve their study habits. So first, I'm going to go over how memories are formed and the process that goes on in the brain during learning. Knowing this helps us have a better understanding as to why certain techniques or strategies for studying are more successful. So first, when new information is introduced, it starts out as sensory input and is stored in our sensory memory. This information will go away very quickly unless you give it selective attention. If you do give it selective attention, then it becomes stored in our short-term memory, and it is lost within 15 or 30 seconds in our short-term memory unless we rehearse that information. This information will stay in our short-term memory until we rehearse it enough to where it becomes your long-term memory. Some more important things to know about memory are the three main tasks of memory. These tasks are recall, recognition, and relearning. Recall is retrieving information that was learned before, but is not currently in your conscious awareness. An example of this would be a fill-in-the-blank test. Recognition is identifying previously learned information. An example of this would be like a multiple choice test. And relearning is just learning something more quickly when you encounter it a second time or later. Now that we know the basics of memory and learning, let's get into ways we can memorize things more efficiently and successfully. There are four main categories of how people learn, and knowing which one works best for you is a key factor in improving your ability to learn and memorize information. These four categories are visual learners, auditory learners, read-write learners, and kinesthetic learners. Visual learners tend to learn better through videos, charts, diagrams, or really anything that visually demonstrates the desired knowledge you are trying to learn. So YouTube would be good for visual learners, or just diagrams like these, and etc. Auditory learners tend to learn better through hearing information. Auditory learners typically succeed in lecture classes because it's all auditory and they're getting to listen to all the information that's presented. Read-write learners understand better through reading and writing words out. Flashcards and notes are very efficient ways for these types of learners to help memorize things easier. And lastly, kinesthetic learners understand and retain information better through carrying out physical activities. Hands-on activities or labs are highly effective with kinesthetic learners. There are many techniques for studying, but these four techniques seem to prove most effective. The first technique is mnemonics. These are general techniques used for improving memory. In an article written by There are many techniques for studying, but these four techniques seem to prove most effective. The first technique is mnemonics. These are techniques used to improve memory. The next one would be chunking, which is grouping together terms so that they can be stored or processed as single concepts. Our next technique would be spacing, which is studying a lot of information in small increments over time. And then lastly, cramming, which is reading through all the information over a short period of time, but this can only be effective if it's used after already knowing the material that you're trying to remember. Now let's apply these techniques that we've learned. Mnemonics are great for memorizing lists or lots of terms. Here's a good example that most everyone knows of, which is PEMDAS. Next we have chunking. This is great for breaking up big groups of information that you have. So if you have to memorize a bunch of words together or like a list of words, then you can organize them into words that are similar to each other and group them up, and that would be chunking. Here's another example, like a phone number. Instead of trying to remember all the numbers together, we split it up into little sections to help us remember easier. Next we have spacing, which is great for exams or if you have a lot of information to study. And in an article written by Sean King about the spacing effect, he tells about a study where college students were told to learn the Athenian oath. A group of these students heard the oath 6 times in a row, while a separate group was read the oath 3 times one day and then 3 more times 3 days later. Then 4 weeks later, the students were asked to recall as much of it as they could, and the students that heard it on 2 separate days performed way better than those that received the mass repetition. And then lastly, we have cramming, which this is great for if you're right before you're taking a test. But like I said before, this really only works if you've already learned the information. The point of cramming is just to make it fresh in your brain, and it kind of ties in with relearning and the fact that once you've already known it, then going over it again is a lot easier and helps you retain it a lot better. All right, so now let's talk about retrieving learned information. Retrieval cues are very important for retrieving information that you've already learned. These are things like words, sounds, images, or anything else just to help you remember. The more cues that are attached to a piece of information, the easier it is to retrieve. And basically, retrieval cues are just adding meaning to whatever information you're trying to learn. Another key term is encoding specificity, which this means that our physical surroundings affect what we remember. So if you're going to take a test in a big classroom, then you need to make sure that you're studying at like a desk or in a classroom in the same kind of setting. That way you're able to retrieve that information a lot easier. More important information to know for improving memory and studying is about operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is voluntary behavior learned through consequences. Reinforcement is a term that goes with operant conditioning, and it's a key factor with operant conditioning. Within reinforcement, there's a fixed ratio, which basically means that it requires the same number of desired responses before you get the reinforcement. A way to apply this to studying is through rewarding yourself when studying. Some ways to do this are taking a 15-minute break after studying each chapter. In this case, that would be a fixed ratio because each chapter would be the set number of the set number of desired responses required before you get the reinforcement, which in this case the reinforcement would be the 15-minute break. Another example or way to use operant conditioning to improve studying is to maybe grab a treat once you've finished with studying completely, or once you have finished all your homework or finished your studying for the exam, you can go grab ice cream or anything like that, and it's basically just a mental reward and reinforcer for that good behavior. Thanks, and gig 'em.